thank you very much for the invitation. I'm quite honored to be able to address you today. And I want to focus on the new situation in the Middle East, and particularly how it affects Israel's security considerations, the prospect for Israeli-Palestinian peace, but also perhaps as we develop this in the question and answer session, what it may mean for religious and particularly Christian minorities in the Middle East. Early hopes that the Arab awakening, how it is known in the United States, may lead to a smooth process of democracy and human rights have given way to a more sober analysis of the situation. The new Middle East is perhaps, at the moment at least, better defined by its twin threats. On the one hand, the Shiite Iranian revolutionary regime and its hegemonic aspirations for the region, and the rise of Sunni extremism. Given the traditional Arab-Persian and Shiite-Sunni rivalry, one would expect that these two threats would be fighting each other, and we can see aspects of this in Syria and Bahrain, either directly or by proxy. But within the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we also see these two elements actually collaborating. This is illustrated on the one hand by the military support Iran is giving to Hamas, and the diplomatic support the Sunni governments from Qatar, Tunisia, Egypt, and Turkey are giving to Hamas. The recent visits by government officials from these countries has highlighted how the challenge, the most serious challenge of Arab recognition and support for the Palestinian Authority. Islamists are also likely to emerge as a dominant force in Syria after the eventual fall of Bashar al-Assad. And all these forces together in the long run raise a specter of the re-emergence of a sort of full-blown interstate war in the region after the last such conflict almost 40 years ago. Just listen to the Muslim Brotherhood's supreme guide, Mohammed Badi, a man to whom Egypt's current president has sworn fealty. Shortly after the fighting concluded in Gaza, he had this to say, quote, "It's Muslims' duty to work to recover Palestine through all means and capabilities, first and foremost by preparing for force." In the short run, though, the more immediate danger is that as a result of the civil war in Syria and Cairo losing control of Sinai, that we may see a rise, and we are already seeing such a rise, of non-state Islamist actors targeting Israel. Last month, Israel, for the first time since the 1967 war, has come under attack from three international borders. Missile attacks from Gaza and Sinai, and artillery mortars from Syria. So given these developments, Iran's support for Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, Tunisia, and possibly also in Syria, some people are already discussing whether the Arab-Israeli conflict may be better now defined as an Islamist-Israel conflict. Let's turn quickly our attention to the recent Gaza conflict, because it's a product of some of these developments we have seen. And in order to understand why Hamas decided to escalate its rocket attacks against Israel, we have to analyze a few of the recent military and diplomatic changes in the region. On the one hand, Hamas probably felt emboldened by this rise of Islamists in neighboring countries. At the same time, Hamas itself, contrary to the popular assumption or hope that being in government would somehow moderate it, has become much more hardline. This is due to the recent election, where a number of hardline members of the Qassam brigades, which is their military terrorist arm, have been voted into the Shura Council, which is their political leadership. In addition, Hamas probably felt emboldened because of its military buildup. On the one hand, Hamas has doubled its arsenal of rockets since the last confrontation with Israel. But much more important is also the qualitative improvement that Hamas has made. Foremost is the acquisition of Iranian Fajr 5 missiles that can and have hit now also Tel Aviv. In addition, Hamas has obtained Russian-made Kornet laser-guided anti-tank missiles, and they've played an important role in the recent escalation that led to Israel's response when they fired such a missile against an Israeli jeep near the border fence, wounding 4 soldiers. Last year, Hamas used exactly the same missile to attack a clearly marked Israeli yellow school bus, and it's only a miracle that only 1 Israeli child was killed in this attack. And lastly, partly due to the chaos that erupted in post-Gaddafi Libya, Hamas also obtained Russian SA-7 Strela shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles. In October, they fired such a missile for the first time against an Israeli helicopter, and the possession of such missiles, of course, raises great concerns about the safety of civil aviation, particularly if such missiles would get into the hands of terrorists in the West Bank, which is very, very close to Israel's international airport. Israel's goal here in this confrontation was clearly, on the one hand, to destroy as many of these qualitatively different, new, game-changing missiles, particularly the long-range missiles that could hit Tel Aviv, and to reestablish quiet and a level of deterrence in order to deny Hamas's plan, which was clearly to establish a new normal, where Israel would have to tolerate periodic attacks on its civilian population, and with the lulls between strikes getting shorter and shorter, and putting more than 1 million Israeli civilians under an intolerable situation. For the time being, for the last 2-3 weeks, it seems to have worked. We will see how long the ceasefire will last. No doubt, Iran and Hamas will try to rearm Hamas as quickly as possible, and much will depend on Egypt, whether it will be able and willing to control the Sinai Peninsula, through which much of the weapons for Hamas are being smuggled. In the past, even President Mubarak was not particularly willing and effective in doing so. It remains to be seen whether President Morsi will be better here. But one element for Egypt here, as a result of this Gaza conflict, is the, elevation of President Morsi in international recognition for his contribution to negotiate a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Now, ideologically, Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood is, of course, much closer to Hamas, which is, after all, an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, than it is to Washington or Brussels. Nevertheless, both European and American leaders have praised Morsi for his constructive role, and clearly, while he may not have changed his ideology, he has, at the moment at least, put the consolidation of his political power and solving, or at least tackling, the tremendous economic problems in Egypt at the forefront. One needs to underline, though, that even though Egypt helped negotiate this ceasefire, Morsi himself had no direct contacts with Israel. He left it all to intelligence and military officials, so to keep his hands clean from having to deal with Israelis. A short note on the economic situation, which I believe is not not enough attention is being paid to. People throw around figures such as, that the 36 billion trade deficit equivalent to 16% of GDP and such, but it doesn't really capture the gravity of the situation in Egypt. As bad as the euro crisis is, what Egypt is facing is in a completely different order. We're talking about an incredibly poor country, a country where even before this acute economic crisis, some 40% or so of the population was living on $2 or less. A country where that is running out of vaccines for children, and where a country that has to import half of its food supplies. So if Egypt is no longer able to pay for its imports, it means that people will go hungry. So that economic crisis definitely played a role in making Morsi more constructive, but then, of course, immediately, basically the very next day after signing the ceasefire agreement, he used this new elevated international standing to what amounts to some sort of political coup, and we seeing it being played out in the streets of Cairo. I think much more important than the power grab, which can and may actually be temporary, is his attempt to push through a new constitution which could really cement a permanent Islamist domination in the country. And it's really worth for people to study elements of this draft constitution and listen to what some of the Egyptian constitutional specialists have to say about this. There is apparently a real danger. Some of the elements that would give clerics an oversight over all legislation that would not be allowed to be in violation of Islamic principles of Sharia. It would even, some fear, allow the definition of punishments, a definition of crimes and implementation of punishments without any parliamentary legislation, simply based on the Constitution. Among other things, it also reduces the power of the Supreme Court, and by reducing it from 18 to 11 members, gets rid of some of the most anti-Islamist members of the Supreme Court, including its only female member. The other impact that the Gaza conflict had was to, at least for the for that period, to overshadow another important conflict in the region, which is the civil war in Syria. I understand there will be a presentation on this very subject later on, so I will keep this very, very, very brief to just 2-3 observations. As we have all read in the press, there are now concerns that the Assad regime may be getting ready to use chemical weapons. According to some intelligence reports, sarin bombs have already been loaded. Sarin is a very, very powerful nerve gas. And the fear basically is that because the international community has not reacted strongly to Assad's past escalation of violence when he was using cluster bombs, the aerial bombings of civilian populations and massacres of civilians, that he may, rightly or wrongly, interpret the situation as such that he may think he has a free hand to even use chemical weapons. There is broad agreement among most observers that the longer the conflict takes, the higher the chances that Islamic jihadists will have a prominent role in the post-Assad regime, because they turn out to be some of the most effective fighters, and they have, of course, the most training from their previous role in particularly in Iraq. There are news that the Obama administration is maybe planning to list one of these groups, Jabhat al-Nusra, as a terrorist organization, and that's because it is considered to be part of the Islamic State of Iraq, which is a terror organization made up of the remnants of Al-Qaeda in Iraq in 2006. So the sooner this conflict ends, the lesser are the chances that these sorts of groups will play an important role, but no doubt the Muslim Brotherhood and other Sunni elements will play a decisive role, and even the eventual fall of the Assad regime is unlikely to bring an end to the violence in the country, and is unlikely to see the emergence of a powerful central state. We can possibly foresee the continuation of sectarian violence and so forth. One alarming development is, one more alarming development is taking place in Jordan, which is really an anchor for regional peace, and we see here a quite unusual collaboration between Palestinian-led Islamist movement and Eastern Bank largely secular movement, who are simply upset about what they perceive as a corrupt regime and economic mismanagement. Now, the fall of the Hashemite kingdom would, of course, have tremendous impact on the entire region, and particularly on on prospects for an Israeli-Palestinian comprehensive peace. I want to briefly touch about the other aspect of that twin threat I described earlier, which is Iran. The economic sanctions imposed so far have no doubt had a tremendous impact on the economy. However, they seem not to have had any impact on slowing down Iran's nuclear regime. I want to refer to the Wisconsin Project on Nuclear Arms Control, a non-profit, non-partisan organization, one of the leading organizations monitoring proliferation issues. And they are now estimating, based on IAEA data, that if Iran were to use all of its some 90,000 centrifuges, it could probably produce enough weapons-grade uranium for one bomb in as little as 1.5 months. And it has already enough low-enriched material that if it were decided to turn this into bomb-grade material, that it would have enough material already to produce 5 nuclear weapons. The sort of breakout time, the time it would need to produce weapons-grade material and a bomb will only get shorter as Iran makes progress in its development of centrifuges, by adding new centrifuges and by adding more and improved centrifuges. And one particularly troubling element here is that Iran is adding centrifuges, and that raises questions about the embargo on Iran, as the production of these centrifuges requires the import of some very, very high quality specialized metals, which in theory Iran should not be able to import. So the question is, where is this coming from? Or does Iran even have, which would be even more worrying, in-house capacity to produce it itself? So this is a situation that we need to obviously monitor. We see Iran already as the greatest supporter of terrorism around the world. We see its support for Hamas, Islamic Jihad, for Hezbollah's attack even on EU territory just this summer in Bulgaria, where 5 Israeli tourists and a Bulgarian bus driver were murdered in cooperation with Iran, which has created and supports and funds Hezbollah. So the concern obviously is if this is what a conventionally armed Iran is doing, imagine what would happen once Iran has nuclear power. So in conclusion, I think there are, as troublesome as the situation is, I think that the West, that the United States and Europe have a number of policy tools in order to manage the situation. First of all, I think it is in everybody's interest to provide for a speedy demise of the Assad regime. For all the reasons I've mentioned earlier, obviously it would shorten the bloodshed in Syria itself. It would limit the spillover to neighboring countries such as Jordan or Lebanon, and would limit the threat of jihadi elements taking power, even using Syria as a launching pad for terrorist activities or missile attacks against other countries, including Israel. I think while we cannot change the political ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, it seems though that we have at least the power to somewhat change its behavior. Given the economic pressure on this country, I think there's a lot of leverage for both Washington and Europe to push the government domestically towards fulfilling its democratic obligations, and externally to keep the peace treaty with Israel, but also to impose tighter control over Sinai to prevent arms smuggling. And obviously the prevention of the collapse of the Jordanian government is of the highest order. With respect to the recent Gaza conflict, I think it is of the utmost importance to keep the Israeli-Palestinian conflict peace process alive. I think we need to limit as much as possible any success for Hamas, which is committed to the destruction of Israel. And I think the recent policy by the EU, primarily spearheaded by Lady Ashton, was a great success. I think by showing during the conflict that not only Washington but also Europe supported Israel's legitimate right to self-defense, it actually helped contain that conflict. Because if Hamas had been under the impression that Israel is diplomatically tied or under pressure not to respond militarily, it would have encouraged Hamas to increase its rocket attacks. But this way, by showing solidarity with Israel, I think it contributed to Hamas eventually agreeing to a ceasefire. But to absolutely deny Hamas any victory, we need to push forward with the peace process. The best way to elevate Abbas is to make him and the Israeli side enter direct negotiations. I was quite encouraged also by the statement yesterday put out by the European Union that supported direct negotiations without any preconditions. I think this is the best way to limit Hamas's influence, obviously to solve any outstanding issues between the two sides, and finally reach a peace agreement. I will end my remarks here. Thank you very much for your attention and looking forward to your questions.